to the All Hail the Fail podcast, the podcast that celebrates messing up spectacularly, embarrassing yourself repeatedly, and failing forward. I'm your host, Monse, executive consultant, coach, author, and proud of every failure and rejection that it took to get me there. Today's guest is Iva Ilieva, a former management consultant who spent most of the last decade driving transformations, scaling up operations, and doing strategy and execution. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here, and pleasure to definitely share a few stories from, as you're saying, the last decade of various failures and a few successes along the way, and hopefully show that, failure is not that scary, and actually we can all learn and develop from that.
Fantastic. I'm super excited. So we ask every person on this podcast the same set of questions. The first one, if your best friend was introducing you at a conference, what would they say?
I think it's a brilliant question. And I actually asked one of my best friends, what would she say? So she shared a few absolutely lovely sentences. So I will share those with you. And then I can give you a bit of a generic description as well, because I think it's good to get the perspective. So what she said was the following: there are some people in life who fill you with energy and some who drain you from it. Well, and no other person I know is the former more true than it is with Eva. She's a true radiator with an endless passion for life in all its shapes and colors. Here is a lady who never gives up, always knows what she wants, and isn't afraid to go after it, but humble enough to change course along the way if needed. A true friend, role model for women and men, and just an amazing person to be around. Please welcome on stage Iva Ilieva, which is obviously a wonderful introduction.
That is awesome. I love your best friend already.
Same. But no, as you said, yes, pleasure to be here. I'm a Bulgarian who made London her home. Already mentioned the career side, but I love traveling, coffee, Catherine Ryan's comedy, and adventure. So that's me.
Awesome. Tell me about what you're most proud of achieving in your professional life.
Sure. I think if you were to ask me a few years ago, I probably would have given you the standard answer of, getting into consulting, it took so much time and energy. Having actually been through that and now exited consulting, I would probably say evolving and, really staying true to myself and evolving as my own priorities and dreams change, and trying to match it with a career that then matches my new priorities. So very happy, I guess I didn't stay with where my initial dream was and then moved on to something new, which, makes me happier, to say the least.
It's so interesting because I've never met anyone who said their dream was to be a consultant except for me. Why was that the thing you were most interested in doing?
So probably 21-year-old Eva just got a bit impressed by problem solving, the glitz and the glamour of what it looked like. It definitely looked sexy, and I thought I want to be part of that. I wasn't really passionate about particular industry or particular niche, so I wanted to keep it general. And I wanted to be, with smart people, working on complex problems. So that was absolutely the dream. So happy to see I wasn't the only one.
I think it was just the two of us, to be honest.
I think so.
I was in that exact same boat. But my story about consulting is in the first episode of this podcast, so go check it out.
Lovely, I will.
So tell me about a time that you failed spectacularly.
Sure. I probably want to share 3 separate stories, and I think there is a bit of an underlying thread of misjudgment, lack of preparation, and, maturity in a way. So I will start with the first one. So for a spectacular failure, I was 19 and I failed my first year of university. It definitely came as a shock, and maybe it will be helpful to just share a bit of background. So school-wise, I went to a regular state school, maybe the equivalent of a grammar school in the UK, but very much, social sciences, history, foreign languages, that type of profile. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to study economics, probably because it sounded really good, in the Netherlands, which at the time was actually very popular as a country to go and study in English. And a few months within the first year, the shock was I was failing exams. I didn't really understand advanced mathematics. And long story short, about 9 months into the year, I had to make a decision. What do I do next? Because I simply didn't have enough credits to continue. My parents had spent a lot of money for me to go abroad, so I'm also only child. So it was a humongous pressure I was feeling that I needed to sort out what was happening and make a plan and rethink my approach. Part of me was probably ready to almost accept defeat, go back to my home country and go to a local university studying whatever subject. And I think my mother played a big role here to almost tell me, you still have some academic wisdom in you. You can probably just redirect your time and energy into something else. And ever since I started learning English as a foreign language, I was always fascinated with international business, corporations, trade, foreign direct investment. So with this in mind, I came to the UK, did a degree in international, or applied for an international business, got a place, and simply found a place where I was playing to my strengths. And there was no academic challenge after that. So probably a combination of a bit of a misjudgment, a bit of a lack of preparation, maybe too many parties. But definitely happy that I redirected my energy into something else.
To be honest, I feel like so many people are in that same situation of just going to university to study something that looks good, but you don't really know until you get there what it actually is. And there's not a lot of resources, I've realized, out there, especially for people who are coming from different countries or who haven't gone to super fancy schools. I know for myself, I just looked at something, it sounded good. The adults seemed to think it was a good idea. I went with it. So I can completely relate. What was the other story you wanted to tell me about the time that you failed spectacularly?
Absolutely. So a few years after that, I was 23. And as I mentioned, I really wanted to get into consulting. Now, I wasn't at a top tier university. I didn't have companies knocking at my door, offering me internships. And at that point, I managed to get about 80 rejections from banks, from consulting firms, from tech companies, from consumer brands. I tried to every industry out there, and I just wasn't getting the positive answers. And there was a bit of a stop and think and a bit of a reflection. I don't think I had a eureka moment necessarily, but I took a bit of a reverse engineering approach, I like to call it. I simply looked at profiles, CVs and LinkedIn of various people in the industry. And I saw two things that were the common threads. One was they were at a top university in the UK, as simple as that. And the other was they had some top brand internships. So with that in mind, in the same year, when I got the 80 rejections, I had probably the busiest summer I have ever had. I did go back home, so I just used, some networking, and managed to land on 3 internships, which then gave me experience and some top brands in pharmaceuticals, consulting, banking. I applied for a few master's degrees here in London, did the TOEFL exam as I was going for Imperial, which was one of those which required it. did a summer school in between, did some volunteering and fundraising. I managed to have the most packed summer. And I think as soon as I started then my master's degree, which was at LSE, I think I had the confidence, I had the CV, and I had a few companies knocking at my door offering me full-time jobs. So I don't think it was anything more than simply copying a formula that I saw was working at the market. And I was very privileged that my family supported me throughout this experience, in all the ways they can support me. So that's how I landed that first consulting job, but certainly it was a roller coaster in order to get there.
I mean, 80 rejections is a lot.
It is. I even
How
had a
did you
spreadsheet.
keep going? How did you keep going?
To be honest, I couldn't afford to stay without a job after graduation, so that was one element. And probably after failure number one, I just couldn't accept that it was an option not to have a job as I was finishing university. So there was the intrinsic and external side as well of just I had to make it happen.
Oh my goodness. Tell me about your third favorite failure.
Sure. So this one was a big one. I would say probably it's beating number one and number two.
I'm ready.
I was 29. And at this point, I had been in consulting for a few years, and I joined a boutique consulting firm, high growth, high impact, and they were setting their own M&A capability in-house. So I was asked to come and help. I think I took this challenge almost too seriously, and I literally spent my entire time and energy into doing that. For anybody who has worked on live M&A deals, you know, the 80-hour weeks are not a myth. And actually, if you're new to the whole area, you can easily make it 100. And I can see you're nodding and smiling. So it feels close to torture, just as a human being. And I think I probably made all the rookie mistakes of not looking after myself, not taking rest, not listening to my body. There was also, not to call it out, but leadership didn't set me up for success. And I just went along with it. And sadly, within 6 months, I was seriously ill. I was getting all these tests. I had neurological problems. I couldn't really control my stress levels. And probably the wake-up call was getting some brain MRIs because doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And they were asking me, are you stressed? And I was nodding, yeah, a little bit stressed. So silver lining was actually the pandemic, which stopped all the M&A activity. And I was just able to go back to my business as usual consulting role. I also happened to be put on furlough, which then gave me all the headspace to actually think about what's next. And it was very clear I wanted at that point to exit consulting. I wanted to go to industry and get still an exciting but normal job that allows me a healthy work-life balance. And that summer I landed a few job offers and I decided to join Liberty Global, which I'm sure you know very well. And I guess, ever since I have had a much healthier relationship with work, and having been through this experience, just taught me it's not all worth it. And somewhere you have to draw the line.
What do you think the failure was there, though? Was it failing to listen to your body? Was it overworking? Because it's not, some people would say that's a success if you manage to put yourself right.
I think I was completely blindsided that there was a problem. Like, obviously, my health was completely deteriorating. And at some point, I was thinking, would I be able to ever work again? Because I think I had all the burnout symptoms you can have. So one, not recognizing there was a problem, and two, absolutely not listening to my body and just doing what was right, which was perhaps to take a break and telling myself that's absolutely okay. So that's why I think it certainly was a failure.
And what do you think it was that helped you to fix it, right? You obviously tried a bunch of things to try fix that recovery. I know a lot of people are dealing with burnout at the moment as well. So what was it in the end that you did to really fix your burnout?
I think it was as simple as taking some rest, but it wasn't, I say simple. I found I was in such a fighting mode that it took me probably 8 months to exit that fighting mode. Even when I wasn't working as hard, my body was still thinking, "Oh, this is war, and I need to keep going." So probably a combination of self-reflection, a few doctors that I had to see, and they very much explained to me how does the human body work and why is it important to rest. And having the headspace. I think a combination of those factors. But certainly tough, certainly tough. I don't think there is a recipe that would work for everyone.
No, and you know what? I'm glad you said it took you 8 months, because I think some people think I could just take a weekend off or take a week of sick leave and then I'll feel better, right? Like they have some idea that their body can immediately kind of bounce back.
I guess it doesn't. It doesn't.
No. So what do you tell people you learned from it versus what you actually learned from it?
Sure. And for the first part, I do have many friends who are in high-flying jobs. And I tell all of them all the things they shouldn't be doing. And I think the real lesson for me is just try to listen to yourself, be authentic. Just because, again, something looks good on a CV, for example, setting up an M&A capability in-house, it might not be good for you. And having that holistic approach and trying to find that balance for you, I think it's incredibly important because it's a marathon. Like we will be working for, who knows, 40 plus years. And we should look after ourselves along the way.
What do you think you learned from it that you don't necessarily tell people, but you know, is something that you take day by day, you kind of reminds you to stay on track?
I think leadership is incredibly important. Choose your company wise, because as much as you can have all the tools and all the great attitudes and your ability to say no, leadership absolutely makes a difference. If they have the same unhealthy ways of working, it will trickle down. And unfortunately, you might not have a choice, or the choice will be to go and find an alternative option to continue your career. So I think leadership is definitely one big part. And the second one would be probably just be honest to yourself. I think we could go into this self-denial mode, and especially London is a bit of a bubble. There is almost pride with being busy. And if you don't do the how many hours a week, it's almost seen as, oh, you're weak. And I do think it's a bit of a mentality change. Once you exit the bubble for at least a little bit, you can see there is life outside of those crazy working hours, and you can do a lot with your time and energy. So definitely a few things. I think it's holistic, certainly holistic.
I find that, you know, it's interesting you talk about that whole wearing your exhaustion like a badge of honor, right? Because I'm sure there were some people who you told you were working plus 100 hours and they were like, oh, that's great, fantastic, yeah, that's so good. How do you think that you manage to stay out of that? Because it's so easy to just get stuck back into the status and the idea of like, I went to this fancy university, I'm doing this fancy boutique consulting. The next thing I should do should be some other big fancy job.
It's a good question. Probably having, and I call it a privilege, to have obviously from Bulgaria, being from Bulgaria, coming from a beach town, having that ability to go back home and see this completely different life where people are happy with much, much less. And in a way, even if you tell them, oh, you have a fancy job or you have been to a fancy university, first of all, they don't care because maybe they don't necessarily understand why this is important. I think gives you huge perspective. It's not necessarily about you changing your entire lifestyle to match something like theirs, but yes, I think seeing happiness in other forms has been super beneficial and gives me all the reflection points that I need to think actually life could be different and it doesn't need to be all about your LinkedIn profile and your CV. There is more to it.
There is more to. I am proud to announce that I am excitedly doing yet another thing. I love that. I think that's the lesson I'm going to take from this discussion is surround yourself with people who do not care and do not understand what you do and just love you for you.
Absolutely. And if you don't have such people, go find them.
Go find them. Yeah. So last question. And this is, I'm thinking about 21-year-old Iva. And what you would tell her to do differently over the next, decade and the things that she did to herself in that time?
I think it's a great question. Probably, I would just tell her to have a little bit more fun. I think it's easy again to think, oh, we have to be very serious and we have to do all these things to make us feel fulfilled. And sometimes you simply forget about the other aspects of life, which could be go and hang out with your friends and don't spend 7 days a week writing essays. And certainly discipline is important. And if you want to have certain achievements professionally, you have to put the time and energy. But have that balance. Don't spend all your time studying and applying for corporate jobs. There is more to life.
There is definitely more to life. And life is shorter and longer than we imagine. So, you've got to try to spend it in a way that makes sense. Iva Ilieva, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciated you joining us in the All Hail the Fail podcast. And we've learned so much from your amazing failures.